Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the opening event of this semester's spring lecture series brought to you by the Alexandrian Society. My name is Aaron Pernat, and I'm serving as the Society President this semester, a role that has been especially challenging this semester with regards to the pandemic, but Dr. Moit's mentorship has ensured that such a great challenge was met with an even greater reward. Him and I have gotten to know each other quite well this semester, and we have been exchanging dozens of emails every week, probably since January or December, to make sure that the society would be able to put on a good lecture series for the university students and the wider Richmond community. But if I do say so myself, I think that we make a good team. Aside from being our faculty advisor and an excellent professor in the history department, Dr. Moit is also the director of VCU's longest running study abroad program, the Barbados program, which has been going strong for the past 22 years. Before giving Dr. Moit a moment to say a few words, I would like to give some thanks. I would like to thank the officers and members of the Alexandrian Society who helped make this event possible, and I would also like to offer additional thanks to the audience for attending and to Dr. Roberts for accepting our invitation. Additionally, we would like to offer thanks to the VCU Student Government Association and the History Department for sponsoring this event, particularly to Mr. George Kelly of the SGA, Andrea White, and Kathleen Murphy of the History Department for helping us promote this lecture and ensuring that we completed all the proper paperwork associated with it. I would like to especially thank Kathleen, who produced this event's wonderful flyer for us in record time. And now, Dr. Moit, if you would like to say a few words to get us started.
Okay, Aaron, you started so good. Now I don't know what to do. Anyway, thanks very much. And the mention of Barbados is so delightful because I think I see Will Davenport, who was president just before you, enter. So it's great to see you all. And then Tay Glover is here from Duke University, and he came to Barbados from a university in Pennsylvania, joined the program, and then on to Duke University, where he has just passed his qualifying exams, and now he is going on to do his dissertation, which deals with the French Caribbean. So again, this is joyous for me on a number of fronts. So with that, I would like to, again, just extend my thanks to the members of the Alexandrian Society. If were we in person, we'd have been able to have them introduce themselves and all that, but I think it's so difficult right now. But I thank them all because we have a great group, including our secretary, Olivier, and all the other officers. And together we have managed to prevail in spite of this pandemic. So thank you all, and thank the audience again for coming out. We have advertised as widely as we possibly can. And we hope that I expect us to have a really good session this afternoon. I would be remiss if I did not single out Kathleen again. Andrea and Kathleen have helped us, of course, a lot. But Kathleen, I have to tell you, when I didn't see my usual flyer, I went berserk. You know, I'm used to the works of art, and this poster is certainly is testament to that. So again, everybody, I think it is very difficult for folks to imagine what goes on behind the scenes, how much, just the Alexandrian Society for me is a full-time job. As Aaron said, the emails between us at 1 a.m. in the morning, or all night, you know, I mean, when there's a crisis that I've got to jump in and do this, do that, do the other. It's very difficult, I think, for people to understand how we do what we do with meager resources and all of that. But the delight is that is what comes out of it. And I think obviously we are a unique body, and I'm so happy that we are able to do this afternoon. So with that, Aaron, I hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. Let's see. Now I would like to give the floor to the Alexandrian Society's Vice President, Charlie Gilliam, to introduce today's honored guest. Charlie, if you would.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Alexandrian Society's Spring 2021 Lecture Series, sponsored by the History Department and the SGA at VCU. My name is Charlie Gilliam, and I'm a junior here at VCU, as well as the Society's Vice President. When a student is chosen to make an introduction for a guest lecturer here at the Alexandrian Society, they draw on the CV of the lecturer, as well as other sources to write it, and then send it to the faculty advisor, Professor Bernard Moit, for notes on revision. The end product is the result of a joint effort, and I want to thank Professor Moit for his effort and direction for working with me through several drafts, often trading emails in the wee hours of the morning to write an introduction worthy of our guest lecturer. The Alexandrian Society is one of the oldest student organizations at Virginia Commonwealth University, having been founded in the 1960s. Its focus has changed over time, however. Since Professor Bernard Moit has become the faculty advisor of the Society in 2003, the Alexandrian Society has been dedicated to the promotion of excellence in historical scholarship with a focus on the Atlantic world in such areas as slavery, race, and gender. Through its work, the Society has advanced VCU's mission of equity, inclusion, and diversity over the past 2 decades. It has also provided a forum for mentorship, personal, and networking opportunities for students at VCU. Though it is dedicated to the study of history, membership is open to all VCU students, irrespective of concentration or major. The Alexandrian Society meets weekly on Wednesdays at 9 a.m. via Zoom and will revert to in-person meetings when the VCU campus is fully open. Anyone who's interested in learning more about the Society is encouraged to remain after the presentation and talk to Aaron, the Society's president. We will also put his email in the chat. Now, to the business of the day. Our guest lecturer this evening is Dr. Christopher Roberts, who currently teaches at the Rhode Island School of Design. Dr. Roberts is an alum of the University of Maryland, College Park, where he earned a BA in sociology in 2011, after which he attended San Francisco State University, graduating with a MA in ethnic studies. At Temple University, he studied Africology and African American studies and earned his PhD there in 2018. Dr. Roberts' research interests are wide-reaching and include Black geographies, public history, archives, museums, memory, forgetting, Black digital humanities, Black radical imagination, and abolition. He has single-authored several pieces, including The Anti-Blackness of White Monumentality as Compass, which appeared in the edited volume Black Spatial Humanities, Theories, Methods, and Praxis, as well as Mfundalai Dance Technique in the SAGE Encyclopedia of African Cultural Heritage in North America. He has also collaborated with other authors. For example, he was the project editor of Collaboration, A Potential History of Photography, which included contributions from Ariella Azulai, Wendy Ewald, Leigh Reiford, and Laura Wexler. He also wrote the article #Black Healing Matters in the time of #Black Lives Matters with Kai Green, Janae Taylor, and Ife Williams. Dr. Roberts has also been active on the conference circuit. Indeed, he has presented papers at numerous conferences, including Geospatial Africana Discourses of Violence and Veneration, Africana Memory and Decolonization and Reconstruction at the 101st Association for the Study of African American Life and History in 2016, and The Sword, the Bullet, the Chalk, and the Blackboard, an Africological meditation on the epistemic violence of the U.S. education system for Africana people at the 41st National Council of Black Studies annual meeting in 2017. Dr. Roberts has been the recipient of several fellowships, including the 2015-2016 Center for Humanities at Temple Digital Humanities Fellow at Temple University, the 2018-2019 Pembroke Center for Teaching and Research on Women, Artemis A.W. and Martha Jakowski Postdoctoral Fellow at Brown University. Most recently, he was named the 2020-2021 Research Associate with the National Monument Audit Project at the Monument Lab in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He is a member of the Association for the Study of Worldwide African Diaspora, among others. As an educator, Dr. Roberts has been teaching since 2013, first at Temple University with classes such as Historical Significance of Race, Urban Black Politics, and the African American LGBT Experience. At Rutgers University, he taught Introduction to Africana Studies, and at both Brown University and the Rhode Island School of Design, where his contributions have been ongoing, he has taught Humanity or Nah, Blackness, Gender, Resistance, and a Memory in Monuments, Maps, and Archives. This evening, we are extremely honored to host Dr. Roberts, whose lecture is entitled, They Want My Soul Like My Ancestors Ain't Enough, Black Memories as Historical Ruptures to the State Memory in the U.S. American Upper South. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Roberts to the Alexandrian Spring Lecture Series. Dr. Roberts, the floor is now yours.
Hello. Well, wow. First off, I would like to thank you for that introduction. Really appreciate it. And I'm glad to, it kind of took me back actually on a journey through, all the different places I've gone and the experiences that I've had. So I'm thankful for that sort of journey through time, so to speak. With that being said, let's get started. Should I be able to share my screen?
Yes, you should be able to.
All right, thank you. All right. All right, so as I do that, I'm actually going to start us off with a song, as is one of my practices with my students to take me. So if you'll indulge me for a few minutes, we're going to listen to some music to get us into the sort of mood and feel for the topics that we're going to deal with today. So I'll get that going.
All I ever wanted was a gold chain with the gold ring, twinkle, twinkle, cause they gold mine. Candy paint with the gold flakes, they gold. See it grand as she smile with a gold tooth. I got a gold to be golden like King Tut. Off in those pictures of that gold, they would flicker, make it hard to call me nigga, cause the chains ain't the chain, they chained us up with. This rope ain't the rope, they hanged us up with. 24K gold face with the Rolex. Invisible set with the grill, that's how gold takes. Jordan 7's golden moment with the gold lace. Gold time, gold mine to the gold gates. If I die, bury mine in a gold case. Slow down, never mind, it's a gold chase. Going for the gusto in a gold place. May God forgive my sins for a gold space. Yeah, buried in gold. Just in case the woman doesn't know in place that I hold. Just in case I was saying I have to pay for my soul.
All right, and usually I'd probably play the whole song, but I do want to get to as much as possible for today. So that was an excerpt from a song by an artist named Big Crit. For those who are unaware, the KRIT stands for King Remembered in Time. That song you heard was Bury Me in Gold off of one of his projects, Forever is a Mighty Long Time. And I just wanted to play a little bit of that because the title for my presentation today comes from another song of his called Children of the World. And he has a bar or a line in there where he says, they want my soul like my ancestors ain't enough. And why I chose these two songs to reference is that a lot of what I wanted to share with and think about with you all today is in some ways a relationship or a relationality that I think is not discussed often enough in spaces of historic preservation, historic memory. Some scholars discuss it, but I'm always of the belief that this should be discussed more. And the relationality that I'm interested in sort of boosting or amplifying today is the relationship between sites of veneration for enslavers and colonizers and sites of veneration and memory for enslaved Africans, because I think we usually think about these locations as one being over here and the other being over there. But if we think about sort of practices of burial, there are always reasons why people end up in the ground, and it doesn't just happen, right? And what I hope to highlight for us today is to understand that there can be no serious discussion of reckoning or confronting any of these histories if we do not get down to the, I guess, brass tacks, so to speak, of why people ended up in the ground in the first place. And in spite of all of that, why I wanted to end on sort of an uplifting concept with Crit's song selection here is that one of the ways that Black people continually sought to affirm themselves in a world that did not affirm them was through different burial practices, right? So that's kind of just where I wanted to start us off with today. But to take a quick step back, I'd like to thank the creator for this opportunity, the Africana spiritual community for looking out for me, and my ancestors for walking with me. More specifically, I would like to call on Marshawn McCarroll, Lucille Clifton, and my aunt Rosalind Graham, my high school football teammate Sean Gamble, and Carter G. Woodson to accompany me in this particular moment. I ask for precision, perspective, humility, and clarity as I begin this work of awakening while in the wake of the unrelenting as a practitioner of Africana studies, Ashe. Thank you to the Alexandrian Society and the Department of History at Virginia Commonwealth University for this gracious invitation and a unique opportunity. Thank you to Professor Moy, Andrea, Aaron, everyone who's introduced me and contributed to that process. It should be acknowledged that what I'm sharing with you all today comes out of what was a few years back my dissertation research and is currently my manuscript project, where I engaged in significant archival research and on-site analysis of monuments, burial grounds, and various sites of memory and forgetting in Baltimore, Richmond, Charleston, and New Orleans. Each of those cities exist still today as port cities, but during the 18th and 19th century in its own way, they were all hubs for what I think of as like the commerce of flesh, or we could call slavery, the Ma'afa, the transatlantic slave trade. Each of those cities had a particular relationship to that peculiar institution as much abroad as locally. And by that, I mean that once the commercial movement of enslaved people transitioned to an intrastate or domestic trade, these cities encapsulate what I've come to term a spectrum of the South, meaning that the entanglements of each of the cities relative to colonialism and slavery reflected the range of ways that the South emerged on the US landscape from its quote upper manifestations to its quote deepest. For today, I'll focus on Baltimore and Richmond, primarily, mostly Richmond, excuse me. That part of the, what I hope to really get to at the end of this is how I think that there's only so much that any sort of city, state, or municipality can do when it comes to confronting these histories. So I'd like to start with the note on praxis, and this comes from Saidiya Hartman. Joining the chorus, not delivering a solo, affirming the maestros. This was the multitude, the small players, anonymous members of the ensemble, common folk whose tears and laughter define the vitality of the Black Belt, the heart and soul of the beauty and disappointment that was Harlem. The chorus is the vehicle for another kind of story, not of the great man or the tragic hero, but one in which all modalities play a part. And that is really how I like to think of my practice, in that, like I said, I do work on 4 cities. I'm from Baltimore. I'm not from all of these places. In fact, right now, I'm in the midst of a multi-year research project in Providence, Rhode Island. And I wanted to bring this up because, well, I know that a lot of you are students here thinking about your own historical practice or how you want to go about this work. So something that I try to do is to not ever show up in a community as if like I am the definitive authority or the expert or the one who knows the place that the people live more than they do. Moreover, I think it's really important to I try to situate myself as someone who is joining the course of work that's already doing, right? The work has been done before me and will continue to be done after me. I think of myself as simply joining the course of those interested in a different type of history. Specifically in Richmond, 2 people I'm sure that you all in the department know well, or I would assume know well, some of you do, but really for me, I think of any of the provocations that I'm offering here today as really extensions, and again, choral echoes of work that's already been done by folks like Anna Edwards and Free Femi. I think the work of the Sacred Ground Historical Reclamation Project and Untold RVA is work that really, so when I went to Richmond, as you'll see in pictures, it was the work of these 2 people that met me even before I knew who they were, you know? And I think that that's really a testament to the fact that communities often are already asking questions that we as scholars come to sometimes later, right? So this is more what I wanted to just offer personally for me as a type of ethical engagement of how I want to show up. I don't want you all to position this or see this as me saying that I've sort of started or iterated a conversation. I think that I'm simply, again, joining the chorus, not delivering a solo, and want to affirm the people who've already been doing this work. So, and again, that's just another shout out to the work that Sacred Ground Historical Reclamation Project is doing, as well as Untold RVA. So a bit on monuments and how I think about them. This quote comes from Gary Wills, who says, "What we choose to remember in stone tells us who we are or who we want to be. The very cost and effort of choosing a site, an artist, a pose, a set of materials, proclaiming that this is a thing that matters to us, we assume a burden when we labor a monument into being." And this idea of monuments as things that are profoundly unaccidental, right? I think that's one important thing that I would like to say here. The monument you're looking at, it's a former, well, it's been taken down. The plinth that you see is still there, but the monument is removed. This is from Baltimore, in my hometown. It's basically across the street from MICA, Maryland Institute College of Art, if any of you are familiar with that area. I believe that's on Calvert Street. But if we were to think really here, one of the things for me, like I said, that's important that we continue to think about is what are the forces behind monuments coming into existence, and what are the forces that seek to have them remain? So in terms of the Confederate monuments, or some of the ones that we'll be highlighting or be referenced here, it's really, I think, vital for us to understand that there are narratives at stake, there are entire histories at stake that are very much connected to how a nation understands itself. So how I think of monuments is that I situate them as kind of the tax in the colonial map. I know in sort of the bio that you all heard, the title of one of the pieces that I've written was Breaking Apart the Colonial Map. So how I see it is that monuments are not necessarily the narrative in and of themselves, but they're what makes the narrative, they're what cohere or adhere the narrative, meaning that when you kind of, it's a tugging at the cape, right? When you attempt to remove monuments that nations hold dear and hold close, you begin to tug at the cape. And what does that mean for historians who, as Trio would remind us, right, are often, we are executors of the will of the guild, so to speak, right? Like this sort of historical guild that Trio talks about. And what would it mean for us to abandon the intentions of the guild and, again, do a different type of history, to do a different type of research? I endeavor and hope to do that type of work. In fact, I hope to get to a point where what I'm doing is not history at all. But like I said, as a practitioner of Black studies and Africana studies, I really think that we have to really try to break apart the conventions of the disciplines that we engage in, right? So less about building up these disciplines, but actually doing the type of work that leads us in a direction of freedom and liberation. And for me, as a personally, monuments are a site to do that. I'm interested in monuments so much because, well, four things for me, really: monuments, maps, museums, and archives. Those are my four sort of sites where I enter as a scholar. For today, though, let's just stick on monuments. And what I will say is that monuments, again, are meant to be solid. We walk down the street, we see a monument, we assume that it is of some importance and of some value. And that's what I hope to challenge here. And one of the ways I'm trying to challenge that is kind of leaning on the work of someone like Michael Hanchard, who wrote an article a while back, let's say 2008, Black Memory and State Memory. Hanchard's article says the following: one of the socializing functions of nation states is the collection, dispensing, and ultimately transformation of specific, but nonetheless popular memories into national memories. Part of the process of transformation of a popular memory, particularly one tied to acts of defiance, conflict, and mass struggle, is to project imagery of reconciliation. and the prioritization of national/cultural unity over racial/ethnic distinctions. Hancher goes on to say of Black memory, if we consider Black memory as the phenomena of a collectivity rather than the presence of an isolated and disparate array of individuals, then an ensemble of themes rather than an ensemble of personal experiences provide the broad parameters and contours of Black memory. For Hancher, the relationships of national memory tend to be hierarchical, whereas those of Black people tend to be more relational. It is this distinction between modalities of memory that I believe creates the instantiation of some of the ruptures between the two. So for me, I take Hancher's point about these different types of memory, and I'm using the term, and I want to distinguish between memory and history, right? Because you all know there are no shortage of conversations that can be had about the slippage between the two. Why I want to focus again on memory here is that I think that monuments, again, the four things for me: monuments, maps, archives, and museums, all four kind of exist on the boundary between the two. But what I would say here specifically, and why I wanted to bring this up, is that what we've seen with Confederate monuments in particular is a bit of a crisis of national memory. And what I mean by that is that sort of a lot of the liberal citizenry of the United States likes to believe the sort of cliche Civil War narrative, right? Sort of classic story of, the North is good, the South is bad, right? The North freed the slaves, the South enslaved. And I believe Frederick Douglass has a great quote where he talks about how it wasn't about, for him, the struggle was about the extension of slavery, right? The South wanted to extend slavery, the North wanted to keep slavery in its sort of traditional locations. This is where we see debates about free soil and a host of other things. But how does all this connect to monuments? It connects to monuments because there's sort of basic logic, and you sort of hear this now in some of the common retorts, is that like, why are we venerating traitors, right? Like, these are traitors. These are people who were against the United States. The monuments should go because they're traitorous. I personally think that the more difficult, but I would also contend more honest conversation is that what if they weren't? And what I mean by weren't is that if you take if you take Jefferson Davis, if you take Robert E. Lee, if you take Stonewall Jackson, any of these individuals, if you take them at their word, right? If you take them seriously, these are in many cases, not all, but most cases, these are Virginians who see themselves as inheritors of the author of the Notes of Virginia, who see themselves as the inheritors of the first president of the United States of Virginia, who see themselves as the actual arbiters of what the United States was supposed to be. For them, the North has lost its way. And why am I sort of going on this is because I think that if you want to have an honest conversation about why people who supposedly are Americans or US Americans would even care about supposedly traitorous statues being taken down, you have to ask yourself a question. Well, to whom are they actually traitors? Or a more interesting question again for me is that, again, this is partially me being from Maryland, a state that through the Mason-Dixon line and a host of other sort of historical, renderings of the past, you could say, is a state that really tells the story of the way that this may not have been so much an issue of traitors as much as the Civil War was an issue of path, right? An issue of, well, what is the best way to move this nation forward, right? So that's one thing, is that I think that people are having a hard time understanding why these monuments matter so much to people who are supposedly, quote, Americans. And again, what I'm hoping to complicate here is that if you were to talk to Black people, right, this is where we get into the horizontal and vertical relationship. Black people have been pushing back against Confederate monuments for decades, right? There are decades-long movements in cities all across the United States calling for the removal of these monuments. My point here is that the supposed contradiction is something that Black people knew long before the rest of the country caught up. And what I'm saying that means is that how much of a contradiction is it if people lived with it for so long, right? Like, what does that mean? So again, I say this to say that I think Hanchard's, the tensions he brings up between sort of Black memory and state memory, and his sort of last example I'll give on this is that if you were to ask, I've just listened, a couple of folks in Richmond who are doing really amazing work, but there's no shortage of Black people in the city where you are or the place where I'm from. If you were to ask any of the elders in these communities about their experiences, they would probably be very quick to tell you that these monuments have been up as long as they can remember. I'm from a city in Baltimore where I've sat in, either virtually or otherwise on hours-long town halls with people who are, in their 80s, maybe older, talking about the presence of these monuments, right? So as far as Black memory is concerned, there's no surprise that people want to keep these things around. Yet the state memory narrative seems stunned that these monuments persist. So that's one thing I'd like to highlight. And I'll come back to that in a bit, but what I want to also get to now is the study of archives. And what I'm sharing with you here is something that I get from Trio and Silencing, but it hopefully will shed a light for you on how I think about archives. This is from Trio directly here. Archives assemble. Their assembly work is not limited to a more or less passive act of collecting. Rather, it is an act of production that prepares facts for historical intelligibility. Archives set up both the substantive and formal elements of the narrative. They are the institutionalized sites of mediation between the socio-historical process, what happened, Trio's Historicity 1, and what is said to have happened, Historicity 2. And if we think about archives, they're kind of how I think about it, again, borrowing from him here, is that these archives equal like facts, or you go to an archive to find the truth. And I've spent probably too much time in different archives, and we're going there, or we're conditioned to believe that we're going there to find an answer, right? Or we're finding some sort of some settled fact. Like facts reside in archives, right? Again, this is the history and memory distinction, right? There may be a sort of narrative of memory, but you go supposedly to find the truth in the archive. And what I'm saying, or what I would like to contend here, is that you find a process in archives. You don't find everything, right? You don't find the truth, because that goes again, the sort of Trio sportscaster metaphor is, and for those who are unaware, in the text Silencing the Past, he uses the sportscaster idea that if you're watching an event and you're supposed to relay that event to other people, you have to make decisions about what you say. Like, you can't tell people literally every single thing. Like, you're on this Zoom right now and you can't tell me what everybody in every box is doing and every word that I'm saying and every inflection that I make, right? You have to make decisions. So archives do the same thing. Archivists do the same thing. They make decisions. And those decisions are based around, for Trio, assembly, creation, recollection, retrieval, and significance. So everything that's in an archive, one, at first it was assembled, right? Then it was made in archive. Like, for example, there's so my script is, so the text I'm reading from, right? Should I someday become some person who whatever archive deems it worthy to collect my papers, right? They would take this and it would cease being, a script in my hand that I'm using, and it would become an archive, right? Like, it's not an archival document right now, it's a piece of paper I have, right? But it would become an archive. So it's assembled, the facts are created. So then somebody would take this and be like, okay, well, on this day, Christopher Roberts gave this talk. Someone would go into an archive and retrieve it, so on and so forth. How's all that connect to monuments? Well, in the monument I showed you all from Baltimore, the Soldiers and Sailors Monument, if you were to go there, you would then retrieve, right, a certain narrative. And that narrative would be retrieved and retold. The fact of what it is venerating, right? The Soldiers and Sailors monuments, there are a bunch of them around the country, right? But broadly speaking, the Soldiers and Sailors monuments were meant to commemorate the cause and commemorate those who died and those who served, right? So that is a cause that's being constantly retrieved and returned to and come back to. The monument becomes a place of retrieval, like it's actually a location, right? So it is a site of memory. It is a site of a return. So I'm really hoping here today, and what I do, this is something I flesh out a bit, is for me, monuments are, and this above quote comes from me, where I say, the monuments, memorials, statues, and markers in public space affixed to what we are told is the US American landscape act as amulets of white supremacist ancestral violence, tax holding in place the colonial map that tells Americans who they were, who they are, and who they are meant to be. So for me, monuments are a type of archive. They're an archive that we don't access through passwords and pull cards and IDs and leaving our computers and pens at the door. They're archives that we access every time we go outside. They're archives that we can reach and pull and get. So that's one thing. And the second part I'd also like to add is there's somebody named a scholar named Tillian Falola, who he writes about this thing called ritual archives. And I thought it was I found it to be a really interesting proposal. And he writes about them as, so he proposes the ritual archive as an alternative to like the more traditional archive. And for him, the ritual archive is a conglomeration of words as well as text, ideas, symbols, shrines, images, and indeed objects that document and speak to practices that allow us to understand the African world, in his context, the African world, but the world more broadly, I would say as well. Falola's ritual archives I really like because it again, to me, it takes off of the pedestal the idea of like the fact, right? I think so much of what nation states tend to do is rely on like the solidity of something like a monument, right? That Robert E. Lee was a valiant soldier. Jefferson Davis was a great leader of people. And even though they may have been invested in bad things, like they were, quote, good in this way, right? Like the sort of, the solidity of a monument is something I'm really hoping to rupture, right? I think that when we look at national histories, their function is to make citizens proud of where they live. Right. I think this is one of Hanchard's more salient points, is that the function of state memory, or what he terms national memory, is to make people feel like they live in a place they're proud of. And I want to do, I wouldn't say entirely the opposite, but fairly close. And for me, it is that when you do a more honest appraisal of the United States and its past, I'm not sure you leave that exercise with pride. You may leave it with another, should you engage in certain ritual types of engagement with history. So let's get to this part. So before I get into the images you see here, I want to say a bit about like why Baltimore and why Richmond, and then I'll read for a while and we'll get into this. So the largest coast-wide cargoes of, and this is according to Frederick Bancroft, the largest coast-wide cargoes of slaves or enslaved Africans went from Alexandria, Baltimore, Norfolk, Richmond, and Charleston to places farther south or in the Gulf of the Mississippi, especially New Orleans. In fact, there's a text I believe I have right behind me. It's not here. It's called Cash for Blood. I would show it to you all. It's somewhere around here, but Cash for Blood, it's on the connections between Baltimore and New Orleans. I can drop the title later if folks are interested. But both of these cities, Baltimore and Richmond, were known for being hubs of what has been termed the interstate or domestic slave trade. Part of what drew me to each of these places was an interest in thinking about how what must be reckoned with is not only that enslaved Africans lived and died in these cities, but that these cities were able to pivot during the 19th century to a model of enslavement that, and I put this, and I don't use these terms lightly, but they're very callous, just so be warned. Their interest was in, they went from enslaving an enslaved population that was built to labor in the places where they were born to an enslaved population that was meant to labor elsewhere, right? What does it mean to have been both like a hub of people coming in and a hub of people going out, right? There's a handful of cities that experience that, and it's something I want to get to. I'd also just want to add quickly on one of the things, actually, I was looking up something Anna Edwards had said, Miss Edwards had said a while back, in response to, and you all can correct me on the year, I want to say it was around 2013 when the sort of baseball stadium proposal was happening, in terms when they were saying that, okay, we are going to put the stadium down where the burial ground is. And I know that got, refuted and pushed back. But why I wanted to highlight it is I think that the desire on the part of the government to put a stadium there, or I think now, maybe more recently, it was a hotel right after that as well. These desires for a sort of a financial or corporate use of space bring to mind something for me. And that's the way that these folks think about memory in the future. So I want to highlight or reference here something that Kara Keeling says in her text, Queer Times, Black Futures, of corporations, that their speculations into the future in these future scenarios, they see them as a tool for helping managers plan different possible futures. They're alternative stories of how the world may develop, which help them understand the limitations of their mental maps of the world, and to think the unthinkable, anticipate the unknowable, and utilize both to make what they believe to be better strategic decisions. Kodo Eshun picks up this point, when he says that corporate businesses seek to manage the unknown through decisions based on scenarios. And the last thing I'll say on that is that when we think about how corporations approach the future, right? We have to think about how the differences between the future scenarios produced through, say, something like science fiction or speculative fiction, and those produced by interdisciplinary teams assembled by multinational corporations, reside in the stance each takes towards the present. In the world of public memory, and this is me now, in the world of public memory and national or state histories, instead of a desire for management, there's a desire for regret. Once things that have been effectively isolated as being the outcome of individual bad actors or individual/isolated bad decisions that were coincidental, but not coterminous to the ethos of the nation itself, the posture towards them can be regretful. The idea being here that some amorphous, quote, we can express regret and then move on. However, regret in an anti-Black nation built on conquest is a bit of a paradox. So indeed, in the words of Bradford Vivian, who wrote the article, The Paradox of Regret, it's actually a really good piece. He's sort of taking apart a George Bush speech in the Gray Islands. But Bradford Vivian says, the rhetoric of mere regret exhorts citizens to dutifully remember the lessons of historical atrocities as a paramount civic duty, while eschewing the question of how affected citizens might be empowered to pursue practical entailments of those lessons through sustained political activity. I would say that a similar analysis can be used when looking at the ways that local governments, universities, some historical societies, and other municipal institutions imagine future scenarios of what they call maybe historical reckoning or reappraisal or, quote, regret. The purveyors of state memory imagine these futures as being a site of regret and progress. However, what does it mean to regret that which you are still willingly perpetuating? Or in other words, as Christina Sharp has expressed it, how does one memorialize an event that is still ongoing? How does one memorialize the everyday? How does one, in the words so often used by institutions, quote, come to terms with, which usually means move past, ongoing and quotidian atrocity? And I think what Sharp really touches on there is, again, what I'm hoping to highlight, which is that, again, the title of this text, right? They want my soul like my ancestors ain't enough. And it's not only that the conquest, the enslavement, the genocide, like all this violence happened. So it's like, you want to kill me and then tell me how you did it, right? It's like you want both of these things at the same time. And when I say you, I mean sort of state memory or national memory, right? Sort of seeking the, have its cake and eat it too, right? Do the whole thing. You put the monuments up and you take them down, right? You get to perpetuate racism for 300 years and then brag about how you're somehow now the most anti-racist people on the planet, right? Like you want everything. And I, for one, say no. You don't get to do that. Again, this is why I'm saying, like, I'm interested in, again, a more honest appraisal of the past or a more honest engagement of the past. And one example that I often think about is, and this hopefully will be salient, especially for you all in Richmond, is and I'd be interested maybe to hear if you all have thought about this after. Do you all think of, don't answer this, but we can maybe talk about it in Q&A, the differences between when people tear down a statue and when sort of the state takes it down on its own, right? The difference between people sort of lassoing or grabbing a statue, throwing it into the water, or pulling at it for an extended period of time, and the people bringing it down, as opposed to, government actors. By government actors, I mean underpaid, like, administrative, like, workers, right? Who have to go in sometimes the dead of night and move these monuments to some, warehouse or parking lot or wherever, where there's usually a tarp over it. But you all, I think, hopefully get my point, right? So the difference between those two. So what you're looking at now, and I will kind of transition to what's on the screen. For much of the remainder of my time, not all of it, but most of it, and I'll go for about 5 more minutes and then open up for Q&A as we get through the examples here. Because I want to get to some of the places in the cities. So in the city. In thinking about, like, these sites of memory, I'm really trying to sit with something Catherine McKittrick has shared when she talks about this geographic work, right? Acknowledging the real and the possible, mapping the deep poetics of Black landscapes is also painful work. The site of memory is also the site of memory. Imagination requires a return to an engagement with painful places, worlds where Black people were and are denied humanity, belonging, and formal citizenship. This means a writing of where and how Black people occupy space through different forms of violence and disavowal. And the sort of quote above here comes from Toni Morrison's Beloved, and anything dead coming back to life hurts. And this is sort of in the early part of the text. There's a conversation with Setha about, if you've read the book, I don't want to spoil everything, but this is a quote that comes up early in the text. And it really stuck with me because this work is going to hurt, is kind of my point, is that doing this, if we want to do it well, or if we want to do it in any way that's meaningful, is not going to be easy, especially for those who believed, again, what Hanchard would call the state memory, right? The memory you were told about this place, that you were told about this country, that you were told what this place was. It's also going to hurt for Black folks because we're tired of it. But I think, in a different sense, it's going to hurt for those who have to realize that the place they live isn't the place they thought, or maybe it is the place you thought, and that's a different conversation. So you all are familiar, I'm sure, with these two images here, or at least the bottom one here, the Lee statue, and the other side. This is a statue, what used to be, again, it's from Baltimore. This one is across from Johns Hopkins campus, actually. There used to be a statue that stood here of Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson. I have that at the end of this slide presentation, which I'll show you. So I'm just going to run through some things quickly that I want to highlight about, again, the way that these histories really, like, reemerge and return. And one of the most tragic examples of anti-Blackness in recent memory happened less than a year ago, 3 years ago, now at this point happened about 5-6 years ago in the Palmetto State. And that would be, sorry about that, Dylan Roof walking into Emmanuel AME Church, participating in Black Bible study, and then proceeding to murder 9 Black women and men who were present. He sought not only to inspire a race war, but preserve the purity and sanctity of whiteness while returning the United States to a country of which, for him, white supremacy could be proud. In his manifesto and the visual archive of images online, Ruth makes clear that his ambition for racial cleansing is anchored in the ideology of apartheid South Africa, the Confederacy of the US, and Cecil Rhodes's Rhodesia. His utilization of those anchors, meaning the jacket that he had on having flags of the Confederacy, the apartheid South Africa, and Rhodes's Rhodesia, his utilization of these anchors as symbolic charms to inspire and empower him to commit these murders is aptly captured in an image that I could pull up later if folks want, of the Confederate battle flag sewn into that jacket. For him, these symbols justified and motivated his actions. These monuments of massacre became amulets for the execution he would commit. And that parallels with my situating of monuments as, again, sort of these tacks, these pillars, these things that actually enhance and reify or give power and give weight to the narratives of the nation. So when you go at those monuments, you begin to tug at the cape. Just a couple other images here. These are all from when I was back in Richmond. This would have been 2018. So these are all pictures that I took. And again, I think it's interesting because most of these are down now. So I just think it's curious, or I want you all to kind of sit with the way that time kind of does that, right? And again, all these quotes that you'll see at the top are excerpts from Toni Morrison's Beloved. It's when you bump into a memory that belongs, and the rest of that quote says, to someone else. And rememory is this idea that that Morrison kind of carries throughout the text, which brings the readers, which brings viewers, which brings all of us a way to think about how the past is never really done with us, right? Even though we may think that we're done with it. And it has a way of coming back in the public and returning again, again, and again. It's another picture here where I was before I came here. And now I'm just gonna read and carry us out through the remainder of my time. So let's see, where is it? All right, here we go. So, according to scholars, information that is available about the scale of the participants and range involved in Gabriel Prosser's conspiracy, and again, the conversation around Gabriel's last name, I think, is a continuing and ongoing one, right? But for now, I'll say this is arguably the largest revolt of enslaved Africans to have ever been planned in the United States, with the estimates about the amount of participants reaching well into the thousands. A plan to occupy the governor's mansion, plans to quickly procure munitions, combined with a mix of recently landed continental Africans, as well as those born in the States, signal to those retrospectively analyzing the plot that this was a massively and painstakingly crafted enterprise. We learn from Kenny Walters's The Prosser Conspiracy that for their part, Gabriel's rebels would march into Richmond with a banner that read, quote, "Death or Liberty." The insurrection fell apart when a severe rainstorm made it impossible for many of the slaves or enslaved to assemble, and a pair of house slaves or enslaved folks who did not wish their master killed revealed the plot. During the first week of the trials, no fewer than 17 defendants were hanged in Richmond. The first few executions drew large crowds of onlookers, either coming to see men die or anxious for revenge. But by the third round of hanging, on the morning of September 18th, the public had lost interest in viewing them. There was one protest against the executions, but not out of compassion for the prisoners. A few well-bred Richmond ladies complained to the city council about the offensiveness of the hangings and requested that they take place away from their view. None could appreciate the safety of Ghost Company. This is me now jumping back to Beloved. And this is a picture of me a few years ago. Well, yeah, a few years ago now, down there. Again. Back. Gabriel had evaded capture initially, but he was captured within a few weeks' time. Gabriel's farce of a trial was brief, and to the surprise of no one, including Gabriel himself, who refused to speak, he was sentenced to be executed. And seeking to make an example out of Gabriel, the city of Richmond deemed him, quote, too much of a celebrity to be quietly hanged in the countryside. Instead, he swung from the city gallows on October 10th. There is no record of his execution, upsetting Richmond ladies. And that is again from Kenny Walter. And that's really where I want us to close out, because what you see now here is a bit of what my work does in attempting to map these types of relationships and these types of histories. This is a sort of going back to Baltimore, but what you see on your screen now is something called a story map that you can make in ArcGIS, where you can sort of plot the location of reference, and you can look at it in terms of like what's it in proximity to, what's it close to, and a host of other things. But what I really want us to sort of end with here, or the theme that I want to end with, are words about how what I hope my project does is complicate the notion of like where burials are. What is a burial ground? And what does it mean? Yes, we have formal burial grounds. And for example, there's Lumpkin's Jail, which you all saw me referencing earlier in the previous slide, right? And I think what I hope that we can begin to think about is that there's the actual burial ground or the burial site or location, but and I can sort of, this is me sort of having zoomed in and looked at the text from the slide here, but I'll just read a little bit for those who don't know. Lumpkin's Jail was owned by Robert Lumpkin, who maximized profits in his compound. And then it sort of talks about the brutality of the site, the brutality of Lumpkin himself, and the many violences and harms that those who were in that jail experienced. Again, I would direct you to the work of Anna Edwards and Freya Gunfemi, who've done so much around this. In fact, the other picture that you see here to the right reflects some of the different, I think there should probably some libations there sort of in the background of that text that you all can see. And as we sort of close, I do really hope that, again, we complicate what it is that we think of as a burial ground. And I'll leave you all with the words of a poet whose name is Ray Paris. And Ray Paris wrote a book called The Forgetting Tree. And The Forgetting Tree has a quote that I think really sums up a lot of what I've been attempting to get at today really well. And in that poem, Paris basically says that what kind of person walks over the bones of slaves? What kind of person is a slave to bones? And where in this country is it not a graveyard? This is not a real question. And that's where I'll stop.
Dr. Roberts, thank you very much for that lecture. It was thoroughly enjoyable. I like how you mentioned like a couple of times that you weren't actually trying to clarify, you were trying to complicate some of these issues for us and for the audience. And it was nice seeing some of the some of the local sites and events, but connected to things that we might not have known about, or new connections, or even new connections between things which we already understand. Thank you very much for that. I think we have, I think Olivia of the Alexandrian Society is going to moderate a Q&A session. So anyone who has any questions, you can either use the raise hand feature and relay them to Dr. Roberts, or you could even put something in the chat or send a message to Olivia and she could ask the question for you. So now would be a good time for that if anybody has any questions on their mind for Dr. Roberts.
Okay, so we'll start with our first question for Dr. Roberts from the chat. As you mentioned, that maps are one of the areas your studies focus on. What is it about maps that you find interesting, and what is it about them that's so enlightening?
I could take that one. Thank you for asking the question. And on maps, what I would say is, so as a researcher, I tend to, as y'all can probably tell from this presentation, I really take an interest in different mediums and entities that propose to tell us a fact or the truth. So for me, maps, or we're told to believe, they tell us where we are, right? Sort of a monument tells you who a person was, right? This person was important because they did this particular thing. A map, when we look at it, whether it's, you know, an Uber, Lyft, your Grubhub app or whatever, you're figuring out where something is in relation to where you are. And usually we tend to believe that, you know, the driver's on Pratt Street and they'll be at my house in about 10 minutes, right? But Pratt Street is only Pratt Street because there's a map, right, that corresponds to us believing that this thing exists, right? And maps, really, what they do for me is that maps frame our lives, right? We live inside of, I guess there's a text called Dark Writing by, I can't remember his name right now, but it's on geography. And he talks all about how a lot of the maps that we live in are products of the imagination of colonial surveyors. And what I really am interested in, I may have mentioned offhand that I'm from Maryland. So one of my side projects is a study of the Mason-Dixon line and how what we understand as the North and the South is really in part an outcome of a disagreement between William Penn and the Calvert family 100 years prior to this thing called the US American Civil War. So had that disagreement ended differently and had the boundary monuments been dropped in a different location, perhaps this history we're talking about 100 years later is a lot different. I say all that to say, I know we don't have too much time, but maps really frame our lives. And I'm interested in breaking those frames and unpacking those frames. And I also do a lot of thinking about borders for the person who asked the question. There's a text I would recommend, Unspeakable Violence by Nicole Guidotti Hernandez. And again, I can afterwards, Aaron, Professor Moy, whoever, I can send out an email or a reference with all of the text that I'm mentioning. But Unspeakable Violence, one of the chapters in that book, Guidotti Hernandez talks about sort of the Yaqui Indians or Native Americans who are in Texas and Yaqui Native Americans or Indians who are in Mexico, and how these families, like, they predate the border, but they actually have families who can't talk to each other, people who can't see each other, because a map decided that there's a thing called a border that separates these communities, right? So that's my thing with maps, is that maps really provide a logic to colonialism and imperialism. And I'm interested in breaking maps in the same way that I'm interested in, like, breaking normative practices of archiving and museums and monuments and all these things.
Okay, this is relevant actually to your discussion of maps and borders, but we have another question in the chat, which is, what do you think is under the colonial map that monuments pin in place? And what do you think can be discovered underneath were all the text to be pulled out?
Nice, thank you for that one. To answer that, I might actually be able to show an example. If I can pull it up, because I think it will be really salient to our discussion. So is it here? There we go, perfect. All right, so I'm gonna share my screen really quick, and this will be a direct answer to that question. So this is a photo I didn't have enough time to show, but I really, really would have wanted to show it. Does anybody recognize this or have an idea where this is? So, you know, when you come off 95, like you're in Richmond, you come off 95, where like the burial ground is, right? So this is basically me looking up from like that underpass. If you walk by, there's like that underpass and there are these stones. So I want you to really just focus on the larger stones that you see. And I promise this will come right back to the question that was asked, right? So I-95 is right above this, where you are. And 95 in that road, well, this is like coming off the 95 ramp into Richmond, but you all get my point, right? So 95 is, and highway infrastructure is reflected where? On maps, right? Like we map highways, we map roads, we map cities, we map all of those things. Now I want to show you another image that will really hopefully bring full circle what I'm expressing and hoping to kind of bring about. So let me pull this one up for you now. And here we go. So here, this is the old sign by the burial ground, and I'll just read what it says. The land beyond this tunnel was once part of a cemetery for slaves and poor free Blacks. The exact size and shape is unknown, as is the number of persons once interred. What happened to their remains is a mystery as well. This was also the site of the city hanging ground. Slave rebellion leader Gabriel Prosser was executed here. Several stories from the gallows platform were used in the construction of Broad Street, over the Broad Street overpass. You can see them on the other side of the tunnel. To your right, they're the largest blocks in the wall. So do y'all remember the picture I showed you first, right? With the larger blocks in the wall. Now, do I know that those are the exact same blocks? It might be, it might not be. But again, this goes to the person who asked the question. I think that what maps hold in place is an inability to ask questions beyond colonial narrations of space, right? So the monument, I'll give like an example local to you all. So in Richmond, right? Let's pick one. So the Jefferson Davis like rotunda, right? That was then taken down. This is the one that was like cylindrical, like sort of the circle with the really, really tall Jefferson Davis statue. Like Monument Avenue only exists because of Confederate monuments, right? Like, I mean, it could be a whole host of other things, but what the monument holds in place is that what the nation is telling you is not a version of the past, but it is the past. That's sort of the really quick way to say it to the person who asked the question. Like monuments tell us the past in stone, and we're meant to believe that past. And when we begin to tug at and tear at monuments, what we begin to get at is the certainty with which the nation tells us about itself, right? Like, of course we were a good nation. Of course we were great people. Of course we did all these good things. Look at these statues of us, right? We would never put up statues of people who didn't do great things. So again, to tug at the statues is to sort of tug at the cape of the nation, right? It's to tug at the hero narrative, right? It's kind of like, it's tugging at the cape. I'll just leave it at that. But that's the narrative that's held in place, right? Like the idea that the nation tells us facts, tells us the truth, as opposed to just telling us its version. And I know there's stuff in the chat, so I'll stop there.
Yes, we have our next question, which is, do you feel that government initiatives to respond to protesters by ordering the removal of statues are detracting from a healing process necessary to our communities? And is there an alternative route that you would endorse?
So to answer that question, I would say that, and that's kind of what I alluded to before. I would, in some ways, I would flip it back to you all. That's like what y'all think, like, because I assume that you all have your own thoughts. But I guess I'll use New Orleans as an example for this one. I find it very, and I mean, I'm from Baltimore. I could say this about Baltimore as well. But it's interesting to me that Mayor Mitch Landrieu kind of was able to position himself as an advocate for these sort of more inclusive memory landscapes, right? When if you talk to anybody from Take 'em Down NOLA, as in NOLA, they would tell you Mitch Landrieu was extremely adversarial to the work that they were doing, like grassroots work, right? So how does this answer the person's question? I personally tend to, I'll just be honest, like I have little belief in I won't even say intentions. Like, it's very tough for a person who's employed by a government to critique that very government, right? Like, this is why I think the more interesting engagements, like I was trying to allude to, come from what I would say are sort of the grassroots or local engagements. It's not to say that elected officials can't do this work, right? But what I think is that elected officials have to really be honest about the position they're in and have to be honest about the fact that they are answerable to constituencies that are invested in anti-Blackness and colonialism and racism, right? Like this is part of their constituency. So I think that elected officials can attempt to do better, but I want to be very clear. And this is where I land on it, I don't think that any sort of radical or transformative or revolutionary histories will come from anybody in anyone's elected office. I think it'll come from the people on the ground. It'll come, as I said, it's the difference between an elected official paying other people who are laborers to take down a statue and the people doing it themselves, right? So let me just go back to the text of the question since it's here. I don't know that it's distracting. I just think that people who desire something more, this is the paradox of regret thing, right? Like if regret is good enough for you, then maybe that's fine. Like I personally think more than regret is possible. I think something beyond the arc of regret, because I don't think that, to me, again, as someone who's been studying monuments for a while, I think we're in a moment of convenience around these discussions. Maybe talk to me in about 3 to 5 years if there are still as many elected officials who are still as passionate about these issues as they are right now. Maybe there's a conversation to be had. Just my honest view of it is that I tend to think that politicians' interest in these things are fleeting. Again, they're welcome to prove me wrong and show otherwise. That would be amazing. That'd be great. I've just been doing this work for a while, so I'm not the most optimistic in that. But again, glad to be proven wrong.
Okay, we're coming up against the end of our time, but we have time, I think, for one more question. So Dion, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question to Dr. Roberts, you have the floor.
Thank you. I guess it's less of a question, more of a comment. I really appreciated your presentation, and I actually came across this event in the VCU Telegram, which was like a newsletter, for lack of better words, that you showcase events for VCU students through. But what really got me was the Big Crit lyric, because I'm a huge Big Crit fan. And I remember Children of the World was the first song that I heard by him. And once I saw that lyric in the name of the event, that's essentially what brought me here. And I really enjoyed the event. And I guess if there was time, I know you mentioned briefly at the beginning why you chose like those two songs. But I just wanted to see if you wanted to elaborate on lyric any further, or yeah. So that was my comment.
Wow, thank you for that. I use music a lot, so sometimes I wonder if it. So thank you first off for saying that, because I guess it's really, I'll just say, like, music for me is how I'm able to, like, if I can't find the words for it, someone else has, you know what I mean? And I think that, like what Crit was saying, so the Children of the World, what I'll say is that line, that particular line, and then I'll go to Bury Me in Gold, but that first line, it was because what I was trying to set up in this presentation is this like Black memory, state memory thing, where I think that Lucille Clifton has a poem it's called Why People Be Mad at Me Sometimes. And she says, they ask me to remember, but they want me to remember their memories, and I keep on remembering mine. And I just love that poem. But to your question, that's what I think about when I think about the Crit lyric, is that I guess if you could pick up on me being a bit like frustrated or annoyed with these things, it's because, again, like I said, I worked in a Black History Museum for 10 years. I grew up in a museum, actually. I was 17 years old giving tours to folks about what it meant to be Black in Baltimore. And, X amount of years later, I'm still, doing this work. And for me, I know that these people who are now telling us that they care about anti-racism, that they care about all these things, I just say, like, I don't believe it. Like my past, my ancestors' past, my history, he's like, I don't believe you, you need more people, basically, right? Like, I just don't. And when I say, like, they want that resistance and that refusal inside of me too. You know, it's like, not only do you want to commit the harm, but you want my like righteous indignation at your convenient interest in this thing. And this whole presentation, or what I'm attempting to do, is to say that you don't get to do that. You know, and then that goes to Bury Me in Gold, where I am really thinking about for example, the burial ground there, where there's so much speculation about where are the bodies, where are the remains, you know, where are the people. And I think some of the work, again, that the different Black women who I highlighted that they're doing, I think gets at like the care of burial, the care of veneration, you know. And I thought Crit's, like that whole song about, you know, bury me with the gold, you know, because I can't take it with me, is really, really powerful. And how do we care for the dead? How do we do what Christina Sharp calls awake work? And that's really why I do what I do. You know, it's not this, you know, fascination with really, you know, because this is like really like sad and depressing stuff. You could talk like slavery, violence, all these things, right? And it is all of that. But I just want to kick it with my ancestors. I just want to kick it with folks who came before me, and to let them know that, you know, somebody's still thinking about them 200, 300 years later, even if it's just, you know, somebody like me in an archive or on a Zoom or whatever. I'm gonna give them the time of day, even though they lived in a time where they might not have gotten that from others. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, but that's a bit of like how I come to this. Also, I got family from all of these, I got family from Baltimore and Richmond. Actually, if this were in person, I have a family member who passed maybe a week ago. I'd probably be going to visit them right now. But I have connections to all these places. I did some organizing in New Orleans, and my family's from Lake City, Lake City, South Carolina. It's a small town outside of Florence. So I also have personal connections to all these 4 places. That was outside of the purview of today's presentation. But thank you for that question. Actually, it's, you know, encourages me to keep using song lyrics. So maybe we'll get people.
Thank
Okay,
you
just
so much.
just 1 second here. Olivier, I know you're in charge of this, but if Dr. Roberts would permit me to just ask one last question. I'll make it up to you. I know we're over time, but when you come to Richmond, I won't have conch ready for, but it will be something else. All right, okay.
That was great. Oh man.
Okay, just quickly, I was watching the MSNBC just very recently, and I can't remember the state, but there was, it's a Republican state, but outside of the legislative chamber, there is the statue of this bust of this person. I never remember if his name was Nathan or what have you, but there's been a lot of controversy as to whether to remove it. And it turns out that this person is revered in the city, and I think there's a holiday in his name even. And Blacks are saying we have to go in and pass this thing every day of our lives to get there to work. And there he is. And it turns out that this person was a grand wizard and a KKK member. And here they are, you know, celebrating him every day, and the Blacks want to get rid of it, and the battle goes on. So my question to you is, as an African-American yourself, where do you think this is headed? Because they seem to, when I came to Richmond, I thought that there were only a limited number of monuments, but it appears that there are monuments all over the place. And as you said, people's memories are short sometimes, and politicians, they go and come on issues, but where do you see this heading in the longer term? Because it seems that the lines are rather drawn. Where a lot of Black folks are saying, this thing has to stop. We need to deal with this issue. And others feel, a lot of white people don't feel that way. So where do you think this is, how do you see this thing? Yeah. Where do you think this is headed?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you, Professor, for the question. It is one that I still, you know, I think about quite a bit. And I I would say, maybe, different ways. Are we at the sort of Fanonian real leap moment of, like some sort of revolutionary action? Maybe one day, right? But in the sort of, if we were to think about this in stages, I think before any sort of abolition or revolution or transformation of this place, what I actually think is coming up next, I'll say in the most immediate, is I think this is as much a question about Black people as it is about Native Americans. That's actually what I would say, as well as I think that where we're headed is that I think people are questioning the Civil War, right? Like that is sort of the event in the history of the US that people are grappling with right now. I think the harder conversation for a lot of people is going to be the American Revolution, right? Like I think, so to answer your question, I think we're right now in a moment where the conversation is about Confederate statues, right? But if you notice, every now and then you'll see a conversation, well, what about George Washington? Or what about this person? Like, I think that those bubblings will start to happen a bit more. There will start to be more conversations about people whose connection to slavery isn't as exact, right, as something as the Confederacy. So what I think will ultimately happen is going to be a situation where cities and for politicians, they're going to realize, so I'm in Providence. I don't know if you all heard that anybody here know what the full name of Rhode Island was prior to maybe just a few months ago? So Rhode Island of Providence Plantations was actually the name of the state. I still have checks. If I had a check right now, I would show you that has Rhode Island of Providence Plantations on it. This measure, Professor, and this goes to your point, this measure went up on the election this past November. The constituency did vote to change it, but would you all believe how close it was? I went to sleep the night of the election and the votes were actually in the opposite direction to keep the name. When the election finished, by a percentage of roughly 55 to 45%, people voted to take the word plantations out of Providence. I'll say that again. The word plantations, we know what plantations conjure and what they are, right? 55 to 45, that means 45% of people in liberal Rhode Island wanted to keep the term plantation in the full name of the state. And they would tell you it had nothing to do with slavery. These were agrarian plantations. This was the 17th century. But they always have a reason. And this is going to be the last thing I say to the professor's question. I think that whereas previously, to you about the lines being drawn, I think previously people would accept like these reasons. I think people are getting a bit less okay with the reasons for this type of racism and this type of symbolism. So I think in the long term, perhaps there's some sort of, revolutionary future, but in the immediate, I think states are going to be a lot more conservative with their policies around monuments. I think that what they noticed is they didn't have protections in place. Like Alabama's now basically made it impossible to tear down anything, right? Like all monuments have become protected. So I think we're going to go in these two pillars where states are going to try to protect their monuments a lot more, but people are going to try a lot more to tear them down. I hope that was not an evasion of your question. I hope it was an answer. I tried my best.
All right.
All right, let's go.
If we could trouble you, Dr. Roberts, for just one more question. I have a last one from the chat, which is, have you personally had an opportunity to speak with the families of the Confederate leaders whose statues have been removed? And if you have, what are their perceptions on the recent developments?
Interesting. So not individual families, but I have, in terms of readings, there's a book, Confederates in the Attic. Tony Horowitz wrote it. If folks are familiar, it's an interesting text where he basically, it's quite a while, I want to say it's a year, but for a significant amount of time, he goes around with different Civil War reenactors, many of whom have familial connections to folks who served on both sides during the Civil War. But why I bring up Horowitz is Horowitz is someone who I've read a lot of, and I've followed a lot of the different, so I've been to my fair share, again, either virtually or otherwise, of city council meetings where descendants will show up right? Where descendants come and will, if you've been to any of these hearings, everybody gets about like 2 or 3 minutes to speak. So I've been to my fair share of those. So through like personal conversation, no, but being in the same space as people where everybody's saying their perspective, yes. And what I think I would say is that, because I do have more personal discussions in terms of people say here in Rhode Island, but those aren't Civil War histories. Those are people who's like members of like the Brown family, and others. So it's a different like past around slavery, but I'll keep it to Civil War stuff for today. I would say that I haven't put myself in those conversations because like this work is already a lot for me, to go into historically. And I'll listen to, I'll engage, I'll, work with, but it kind of goes to the title, the person brought it up before, right? Like that to me would take, like to do sort of the slow work of like sitting and listening and talking with people about their conflicted feelings, about their descendants or their ancestors, stuff, staying like that for me would be like taking a part of my soul as well, right? Like I have a limited amount of finite time on this planet. And for me, I'm really interested in, like it says, like they want my soul, like my ancestors ain't enough. Like I want to do that work of, working with the people who don't know who they're descendants of because of what those folks' ancestors did, right? Like that's the thing, right? The unnamed folks in that burial ground in Richmond, Laurel Cemetery in Baltimore, right? So I do work with descendants, just not the descendants of the enslavers. Again, I could collaborate with folks who do that work because I do want to say it's really important. There's a really good documentary, Traces of the Trade, actually, that does really interesting work. It's based from up here in Rhode Island. Descendants, white folks who are descendants of the DeWolf family. And if the name DeWolf sounds familiar to any of you, the DeWolfs were one of the most prolific enslaving families. And that documentary kind of dives into a lot of work they've done, like around their familial, like reckoning and really caring about their ancestor, but also, like grappling with all those difficult emotions. So there's people out there who do really exemplary, like stellar work in that vein. For me personally, I tend to shift my energies in a different direction, which is the histories of people whom, due to slavery, cannot make those lineal connections, right? So in absence of a sort of lineal connection, I'm interested again in what Falola and others talked about, is these type of ritual archives, these speculative histories, and really different types of engagements with the past. So again, I would, sure, like welcome such conversations, and they seem like, again, I would say are really important. Just currently, at least at this point in my career, maybe I'll get older and that'll be different. But as of right now, I'm tending to direct my history more so with the communities of folks that I've kind of grew up and knew, and my elders, actually. That's actually the big thing. I'll only leave it there. I learned that from Carter G. Woodson, right? Who Carter G. Woodson devoted his life to just everyday Black people and the things that they're interested in. So that's kind of where I'll kind of leave that last one is, my elders and the children in my community and my peers. I kind of situate myself there for the most part.
All right,
Well,
thank you.
Thank you so much to everyone who submitted questions, and to Dr. Roberts for sharing some of your process with us and answering those.
Yeah, thank you very
all for
much,
having
Olivia
me.
and Dr. Roberts. Thank you. And thank you everyone who submitted the questions and for attending. I guess the last thing on the agenda is I would like to give the floor to one of our officers, Max, to speak just a little bit about the Alexandrian Society, what we do and how to get involved, if you would like to.
Thank you again, Dr. Roberts, for giving such a wonderful lecture this afternoon. We would like to end this event by taking a moment to talk about the Society for any students who may be interested in joining. The Alexandrian Society is one of VCU's oldest academic organizations and has been faithfully guided since 2003 by our faculty advisor, Dr. Bernard Moit. Since then, Dr. Moit has dedicated the Society to the study of history and the promotion of excellence in historical scholarship. The Society offers its members opportunities to step into the professional world and work closely with renowned scholars such as Dr. Roberts, opportunities that can help take one far after graduation. Though the Society is primarily focused on the study of history, membership is open to any and all majors. We meet every Wednesday at 9 a.m. via Zoom, and anyone who is interested in joining is welcome to stay after or send Aaron an email which can be found on the event flyer or in the chat below. Once again, we would like to thank you all for attending, and we would like to especially thank Dr. Roberts for taking the time to speak to us today.
All right, everybody. Appreciate that. Thanks you all so much.